We're 8 days away, Roger, from Judgment Day, but there's a chance it won't be just one day, that the results could take some time. Are these platforms ready?
Obviously not. I think that what we've learned, Emily, is that the root cause of disinformation, the root cause of hate speech and conspiracy theories, those things have always existed. But on the internet platforms, specifically on Facebook, on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, the business model and the algorithms that make these companies so successful amplify hate speech, disinformation, and conspiracy theories as really the lubricant for the business model. And it has been an enormously successful strategy that has undermined democracy pretty fundamentally. And this election is really where all of it is coming to a head. It's really obvious now to voters that disinformation is so widespread and policymakers are in the same place. And so in many ways, I think that voters are far, far better prepared than 2016 for the kind of disinformation we saw then. What we don't know yet is what kinds of disinformation we will see after Election Day, and whether people are as ready for dealing with that, whether the news media is as ready to deal with disinformation in the days after the election ends as they have
Roger,
been in dealing with Russian
picture.
disinformation lately.
Paint that picture for me. What happens after the election? We've heard from sources at Facebook that Mark Zuckerberg is preparing for civil unrest and working on things that Facebook can do in this scenario. What does that look like?
So I'm actually mostly worried about disinformation targeting journalists, because the economic incentives of journalism today are driven by the same things that drive Facebook and YouTube, which is to say they need attention. They need to grab that attention and hold it as long as they can. So everyone will be looking for that moment when they can start to either declare a winner or, just as importantly, declare some important piece of news along the way. And I do expect that there will be lots of players attempting to exploit that. I'm really relieved how effective the inoculation of journalists has been in the last couple of weeks with all the Hunter Biden nonsense and the Proud Boys email scam that came up. But it'll be a different phenomenon after the election, because, again, that's a different kind of environment. For Facebook, for YouTube, for Instagram, for Twitter, the issue is that their ability to enforce their own rules has not been good. And the rules themselves have carve-outs that will allow a significant amount of shenanigans. The thing that scares me most is the stuff happening inside Facebook groups, the private Facebook groups, the kind of places where QAnon people and the most aggressive far-right people hang out. That those are places that Facebook does not patrol, and where things can be shared without showing up in the Facebook systems. And if, in terms of organizing, the recent shutdown by Facebook, by YouTube, by Twitter of many QAnon pages and groups, that was super helpful. That undermined their short-term ability to organize, but it didn't wipe them out. And they have been working very hard to reconstruct networks. And so I'm nervous about all of those things. I'm praying that we're going to come through this smoothly, but I think it would be naive to assume that people will not try to exploit the uncertainty to insert disinformation into our politics.
Interesting. Now, on that note, I want to talk about some of the things that Facebook has done leading up to this moment: encouraging voter registration, ongoing efforts to combat misinformation and inauthentic behavior. They've modified their political ad policies. They've banned, supposedly, they say, QAnon, Holocaust deniers, the post-election notifications that they'll have in place. Facebook says, and quoting Guy Rosen, that the head of integrity, that they've learned a lot since 2016 and they've made a lot of progress. They've got more than 35,000 people across the company working on safety and security issues. Why is that not enough for Facebook to be ready?
Well, I think we can just look at the evidence this year. So let's think about COVID denial and how profound an issue that has been for the country. Obviously, it didn't start with social platforms like Facebook, but they amplified President Trump. They amplified other voices in the COVID denial sphere and really undermined our country's response to the pandemic. And I don't know what percentage of those who are dead you would attribute to President Trump versus internet platforms, but the internet platforms clearly played a role in this, and it was not helpful at all. I think we've also seen, relative to QAnon specifically, that just using Facebook's own numbers, Facebook's research said 64% of the time when someone joins an extremist Facebook group, they do so because Facebook recommended it. And that means of the 3 million that were in just the largest QAnon Facebook groups and pages, Facebook almost certainly recommended 2 million of those people to join. So what Facebook did in shutting down the largest pages and groups for QAnon is demonstrably helpful. But their enforcement of that and the ability of these things to morph into something else, to use camouflage like Save the Children, the hashtag that they've been using to try to mask what they're doing, that's still there. When we think about Holocaust denial, we're still trying to find out if Facebook has banned Holocaust denial in any language other than English. What are they doing about other genocides? The answer is nothing. So there's nothing about the Armenian genocide, nothing about Myanmar. So what I would say here is I'm glad they're doing stuff. I hope they enforce it well, but even that won't be enough. 35,000 moderators has not put a dent into this problem because it's the wrong approach. When the problem comes from the business model, when it's built into the operations of the company at its most basic level, no amount of human capital put in at the end is going to fix it. You need to change the business model.
So Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Sundar Pichai, all testifying before Congress this week. The issue in particular is Section 230 and the liability these platforms face for content posted on those platforms. In terms of regulation, what do you think needs to happen to get these issues under control? And is there any hint of optimism in your mind that can actually happen, satisfactorily?
So this is, I think, the silver linings are everywhere on the regulatory front. 3 weeks ago, the House Antitrust Subcommittee published a bipartisan report in which it labeled Facebook, Google, and Amazon as monopolists. This is incredibly constructive. In America, monopoly is always been the bad guy. And an antitrust case is like playing a video game and reaching the very end and being declared the winner, right? If you've been so successful, you've gotten an antitrust case, that is the grand prize. And historically, in technology, every major wave, starting in 1956 with the creation of the computer industry, every wave has been driven by an antitrust case. And so investors in particular should be welcoming this process. I think there are two other areas in which regulation is likely. I think in antitrust, it's almost a certainty. The two places where it's likely are privacy, where the state of California has a referendum on the ballot this year, Proposition 24, that would put real teeth into the existing California privacy law and bring it pretty close to the standard of Europe's GDPR. The third area, the one where we have the most work to be done, is related to safety. So think of this as all the things related to hate speech, disinformation, and conspiracy theories, everything related to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, everything related to the culture and business model of Silicon Valley, where unique among all engineering disciplines, engineers in the tech industry are not held responsible for harms that they cause, and where there is, I think, now a bipartisan sentiment that that's just not appropriate, that the products that these guys create are so important to our economy that, like the chemicals industry in the 60s, like pharmaceuticals at the turn of the 20th century, like the building trades in the 19th century, we have to find a way to regulate them so that they can do all the good without doing the harm. And I think if that package happens, if we get safety, privacy, and antitrust, that will unlock an entrepreneurial wave that will be the biggest wave of tech that we've ever seen in this country. It'll be more diverse in terms of geography, and I think it'll be more diverse in terms of the categories it touches. And I think the opportunity to return to technology as being something that empowers the people who use it instead of victimizing them, I think that is something that 3 months ago seemed like it was very far off. Today, we are closer to it. Regulatory processes take time,
Okay.
but we're making progress.
Roger, I have about a minute left. You saw the volatility in the markets today. Do you see more volatility for the big tech names? We've got big companies reporting later this week. We've got the certainty that the pandemic will continue no matter who is in office. We saw SAP present a pretty dismal forecast for the first half of next year. What's your outlook?
Well, I don't want to pretend like I have a crystal ball, Emily, but I do believe that the market has enjoyed a period of prosperity because of some of the actions the Trump administration has taken, both at the Federal Reserve level and in terms of the response to the pandemic. And the absence of a follow-on intervention in the economy relative to the pandemic is causing justifiable concern. If we don't do that soon, people are not going to have disposable income, and that's just going to be bad for earnings and therefore bad for the market. I also think that the breakdown in U.S. trade relationships around the world is going to have a cost, and it's going to show up in the earnings numbers over the next few quarters. And so I look at all this, and it feels to me as though the market is heavy, that it's due to, if you will, give back some of the gains simply because of the uncertainty we face now. But as I said, I am long-term super optimistic, Emily, because I do think we're going to restore democracy, and I think we're going to restore capitalism, and those two things are going to be great for investors.